It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Suzanne Etgen. She's the Executive Director of the Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Donna.
Although a lot of people might have heard of the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy, and by the way, it's at Arlington Echo in Millersville, some people might not know of all the work that you do. So that's why I wanted to have you on today, because your people do a lot of good work in the community, and there's some people in the community that should be aware of it because they might need it, yes?
Sure, of course. The Academy started because really we can't solve our water quality problems without everyone who lives, works, and plays in Anne Arundel County being part of the solution. So I'm thrilled to be talking about the Academy with you today.
Let's talk about the stewards first, because that's just one part of it, is it not?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what is a steward? How does one become one, and why should people become one? And is it a huge amount of responsibility? Is this going to take over their life?
Be careful what you wish for, right? So Watershed Stewards are really unique community leaders. They're people in communities, and by community, communities can mean everything from a neighborhood to a house of worship to a school or a library, even to a business. So they're members of a community who want to help their community reduce pollution. And so to become a watershed steward, we offer a class. Right now it's an online class, but usually it's a mix of classroom and field sessions that introduces watershed stewards to three things. The first thing is just the knowledge of what are the issues that are relevant in our community that affect our watershed. The second is it introduces watershed stewards to the people, restoration professionals, and others who can help them. And then last, to resources. So watershed stewards are engaged in, about a 15-session class that prepares them to engage their communities. It's in the neighborhood of 40 to 60 hours long, depending. And it's structured with a combination of both classroom learning, remote learning, and then also field sessions. And it prepares watershed stewards to do three things. The first thing is how to assess their community. So we use a combination of environmental and social assessments to help watershed stewards identify what are the pollution sources and the restoration opportunities that are specific to their community, because we all know that communities are very, very different. Brooklyn Park is different from Shadyside, is different from Odenton, which is different from Annapolis. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. So the first thing is the assessment. The second thing they learn is how to engage and educate their community. And then the last thing they learn is about those restoration techniques and habits that their communities can take that will reduce pollution.
Okay, and again, we wanted to make it clear, a community doesn't just mean development of houses or apartments. It could be church community.
Absolutely, yes. All different kinds of communities, libraries, businesses, houses of worship, schools, and certainly neighborhoods.
Okay, and then there's a master steward.
Yes, we have called them Master Watershed Stewards. But we refer to them now just as Watershed Stewards. They are the ones that attend, all of the classes and have the highest level of education, if you will. We also offer shorter classes for people that want to dip their toe in and might not be a long-term community leader, but do want to have the resources and do want to lead action.
All right, and is this a paid program? People are paying to get this training?
There is a tuition for the Watershed Steward certification course, which is $250. It costs about $5,000 to educate a watershed steward, and so our Watershed Stewards Academy board and Anne Arundel County Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration both put up funding for the balance, but there is a tuition. However, we do not want that tuition to be a barrier for anyone, so we do offer scholarships as people need them.
That's awesome. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole, talking today to Suzanne Etgen, the Executive Director of the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy. All right, so we just went over becoming a steward. How long has this program been going on?
We started our first certification course in March of 2009, so a little over 12 years now, and we're currently training our 13th cohort of Watershed Stewards, so that's pretty exciting. And Donna, you know, the other thing I didn't say about the certification course, which I don't know if now's the right time to talk about it, but there's the coursework, but then also Watershed Stewards do a project in their community as part of becoming certified.
Okay, and going back 13 years ago when it started, do those people come back and still help, like the newer people that are getting involved?
Yeah, you know, that's one of the best things about the Academy is that people really do stick around. So we trained 32 people in our certification course in 2009, and about half of them are still active. And by active, I mean out there doing projects, you know, doing presentations, and then helping other watershed stewards with their projects.
When you think back in your memory banks, what are the projects that have been most, the ones that stick out most to you, either because they were so incredibly wonderful or because you've learned from them and said, all right, Liz, there must be another way?
Oh, my gosh, so many projects. Well, first of all, I think at last count there were over 3,200 projects, from individual rain barrels all the way up to, you know, $1 million stream restoration. So it's so hard to pick one, but gosh, and so much learning, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've learned you know, how to properly prepare a site and what to do and what not to do, and most of all, what you think is going to happen doesn't always happen. You know, I think of a project that sticks out in my mind is the stream restoration up on Cattail Creek, which was just completed last year. It's in the Berrywood community up in northern Severna Park, and that community had tried to get a project started for several years, about over a decade ago, around 2006, 2007, and they had professionals out, they had a design, you know, concept, and the project fell apart basically because they didn't have the buy-in of the community. And so the community around 2014 had a Watershed Steward certified named Molly LaChapelle, and she actually came to our conference one year and was sort of lamenting the problems of not being able to get this project off the ground to a funder who then found funding for her project.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then you know, several years later, it's installed. And I think what she would say and what we would say, the big lesson learned there is really the importance of that community engagement. And you really have to have everybody on board. And sometimes that just means knocking on everybody's door and taking the time to make sure you listen and respond to their concerns. So that one sticks out to me as a special project.
And no matter where these are, they're on the Bay watershed, and all of these rivers and all of these creeks play such an important role in the health of the Bay and / communities around it.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere you live in Anne Arundel County, you're in the Bay watershed, so you can't escape it, even if you're up by the airport.
I have a memory of going out to cover a story and how impactful it was for me as a journalist watching what happened there. And I don't know if you all were a part of it, but I think you were, was the Asbury United Methodist Church on the Broadneck Peninsula?
Yes.
That was a special one, yes?
Yes. Yeah, that one was particularly special because here was a community that, had this really historically significant cemetery that existed for hundreds of years. And yet in the space of a very short couple of years, they had stormwater problems that were really devastating human remains.
Right.
And it wasn't anything that they did. It's not like they came in and built things and then had problems. It was all uphill development. And the solutions were not at all obvious, even to the professionals that visited the site at first. And so it was really a lot of creativity, and it also, that project really forced a holistic view of that watershed, in that what we eventually figured out is that projects needed to be done much higher up in the watershed in order to solve the problems below. So it was really not just one project, but a series of projects.
Yeah, and that harkens back to the problems that Ellicott City has had over the years, yes?
Yeah, that's really a good analogy, because, sometimes where you see the problem is not where the solution should be.
All right, let's take another quick break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole, talking today with Suzanne Etgen. She's the Executive Director of the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy. You have several programs, including Backyard Buffers, Clean Water Communities, Groves of Gratitude, Replant Anne Arundel, Riverwise Congregations, and Stormwater Success. In the space of not very long, can you sum up some of those programs and why communities should know they can reach out to you directly, yes?
Yes, of course. So I think that the program that is most on my mind at this very moment is our tree planting program called Replant Anne Arundel, and there's several different phases of it, but essentially it's an effort to plant trees all across Anne Arundel County, and there's a couple of ways that people can engage with that right now. First, our Backyard Buffer program, which is funded by the Department of Natural Resources, is getting ready to open, and residents can order tree seedlings that they can plant in their own backyard. And then next, our Replant Anne Arundel program, which is also getting ready to reopen. We train leaders called tree troopers in about a 4 or 5 session class that's remote, and then those leaders get to design and have tree projects installed right in their community. And the trees that Replant tree troopers install are larger trees. So Backyard Buffers is the little seedlings, and Replant Anne Arundel trees are much larger, and they're all native trees from a really special list of trees, which is the Resilient Tree Species List. So all trees that are native and will live here in this region in the coming years as our temperature and precipitation changes. So that program is getting ready to open. So really anyone that has an interest in trees or learning about trees should check out Replant Anne Arundel.
Speaking of which, you sort of alluded to what might happen in the future. Have we changed zones, or are we looking at being changed into a warmer zone?
Well, so the climate predictions do indicate both changes in temperature and volume and intensity of rainfall. So yes, there are predictions, and we are starting to see some of our climate data change for sure.
Why are the trees so important?
Oh gosh, trees are sort of like the miracle solution for many things. Flooding, certainly they absorb and filter stormwater. They filter the air. They hold water. When it rains, if you've ever stood under a tree, it's almost like standing under an umbrella. So as it rains, their leaves and their bark and their branches hold the water. When the water gets to the ground, their roots absorb the water. And our tree canopy has changed quite dramatically, even in the last 10 years. And so if we can increase our tree canopy, I think we can help stem some of the effects of the higher intensity rainfalls that we're starting to experience.
And being a birder, they also provide a tremendously important habitat to not just birds, but all sorts of wildlife.
Yeah, last year we had Dr. Doug Tallamy at our annual conference, and he's done all that research on Lepidoptera, or butterfly larvae, and I think a white oak hosts over 500 different species of caterpillars, and those caterpillars are the main food for the migrating songbirds that we all love to see. And so if you would like to have songbirds in your yard, plant an oak tree.
Exactly right. All right, so that's Replant Anne Arundel, and we talked about the tree troopers, which I love the name of it. Riverwise congregations, I think that goes back to some of what we touched on, but sort of sum that one up.
Yeah, sure. Riverwise Congregations is a regional program to support houses of worship to care for creation. Both there's training aspects and also in-the-ground restoration opportunities. And last, and I think most importantly, opportunities for congregations to learn from one another what works in helping to engage congregations. And I think that, many faith traditions have strong moral and spiritual imperatives for caring for the natural environment, but there's often not the expertise within the congregational setting to help people to do that. And so that Riverwise Congregations really helps congregations have access to that technical support to then actually actualize the spiritual imperative of their faith tradition.
And the reason why this is so important is because the spiritual community, churches, synagogues are so prominent in the communities. They own a lot of land.
Yeah, they own a lot of land. There's often a lot of impervious surface in the way of parking on that property. But more importantly, they connect a lot of people. There's people that might not necessarily interface with environmental organizations or efforts if not for their congregation. And I think it's really important to have congregations sharing with their congregants what they can do to care for creation.
Suzanne, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Donna. It's been a really fun conversation.
It's my pleasure. For more information on the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy, it's aawsa.org. This is Donna Cole. This is the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.